We're back here, whole 9 yards on a Monday afternoon. Drew PN here with Brandon Krikorian. Brandon, how's it going?
It's going good. We had a good weekend. We hung out, so that was
Yeah,
fun.
yeah,
But yeah, no, it was good. Good weekend, and now we have NFL free agency to look forward to.
yeah. Well, I mean, the first thing I'm so annoyed because the past, I don't know, probably the past month, the school has had food trucks, and every Monday they have lobster tails,
Yeah.
and so they go from like it's like 11 to 2. But since we record from 1:15 to like 2:45 or whatever it happens to be, I actually have to like beat our recording time to be able to go there, and I haven't done that yet. And it's probably the food truck that I've wanted to go to the most.
Yeah.
Um, I was looking at the prices are insane, but I mean it's meal points, so whatever. But we'll just, I mean Drew Brees retired. Um, Huge news, obviously. I mean it was supposed to be expected after they lost to the Bucks in the divisional round. I'm not too sure exactly what happened, but we ended up waiting much longer time than we should have or we expected. Reminds me of Rob Gronkowski a couple of years ago after the Super Bowl. Everybody thought he was going to retire, and then we ended up waiting. I mean, a couple months, and then he officially retired. What are your?
Well, I think I saw something on Twitter that said that he was waiting until the day that he signed with the Saints 15 years ago, because when he announced his retirement, I think it was yesterday. It had been exactly 15 years to the day he signed with the Saints, so maybe that was the reason why he was waiting. Because you're right, it was pretty evident that he was going to retire, just based on the season that he had. He's been contemplating retirement for a couple years now, and then after that Bucks game, it just seemed like he was going to retire. Maybe like the next day, honestly, or after the Super Bowl happened. But it happened. It was expected. I think we all kind of thought he was going to retire. And I actually just saw a news report that he'd been in talks. I think he technically was signed to NBC Sports before he retired, but he was just waiting until after he retired to actually officially join them. And he's going to be a studio analyst for Football Night in America. So I think that's the one with like Tony Dungy, I think Chris Sims is on it, Mike Tirico when he's in
Rodney
the studio.
Harrison.
Yeah, Rodney Harrison. I think he's probably, I don't know what spot he's taking, or if he's just being added to that. But I think that's the role that he's going to play.
You would assume you'd. I mean, if it's the pregame to Sunday night, it's typically Dungy, Tirico, and Harrison.
Yeah.
You'd assume he would replace either Dungy or Harrison. If he was to replace one of those three, I don't think he's going to replace.
I think he'll probably just be added to that. But that's what he's going to do, and then I think they said he's going to do NBC sports coverage of Notre Dame football, and he's going to do Olympics. So I don't know what he's going to do for Olympics, but he's clearly just going to be. I don't know if he's going to be a broadcaster or if he's always going to be like an analyst, but I guess that's what he's probably going to do for the next, if he's good at it, next 20, 30, 40 years. So
When you have such a big name like that, it can be. I mean, obviously, it's a very tough job, but it's probably even tougher to be bad at it, especially as an analyst, just because I feel like people are so interested to hear what you have to say that even if it's a relatively bland take or it's not as maybe articulate as somebody like, a professional analyst or whatever, like a Stephen A or a Skip or somebody who has their takes, for take's sake. People are going to be interested to hear what Drew Brees has to say. I would like to see him one day be, a Tony Romo or, take one of those jobs, maybe replace Aikman one day. I mean, Aikman's not even that old, so it's not like Aikman is willing to dying to give his job up, and I guess they're different companies as well, but
yeah.
that would be interesting for me. I'd like to see him do one of those types of jobs, but we'll see with Breeze. I mean, Winston, as far as the football aspect is concerned, looks like Winston's going to be the starting quarterback next year. I'm not too excited about it. Clearly, I mean, as a Bucs fan, I don't want them to have a great starting quarterback, so technically I should be excited. The question is, and it's not just as simple as people are harping on the turnovers. They're saying if Peyton can limit Winston's turnovers, he's going to be and I guess they're not necessarily saying a great quarterback, but he has other problems other than just the 30 interceptions. I mean, whether it's an interception, whether it's fumbles, whether it's, I mean, even off the field problems, he's just not been a great locker room guy, especially in Tampa. And even with leadership, I mean, I'm sorry to harp over 5 seconds of just a clip, but the eat the W thing is some of the worst stuff I've ever seen in pro sports. It is horrible. And, you know, if Jameis Winston gives a speech like that to his teammates in the divisional round of the playoffs, you already know for sure they're losing that game. So,
Yeah, and I mean, Winston, they were saying like they both wanted to come back to each other. So it does seem like he's going to be the starting quarterback, but you're right. Like when we were doing that quarterback checklist list that we were doing, if you were to put those, I think it was 6 characteristics up against Winston, he'd be none of those. He would not be anywhere close to the top of those. He'd probably be in the middle for most and at the bottom for some of them. It's not only just the turnovers, like the picks. It's also the awareness in the pocket. His ability, he can move in the pocket, but he just always seems to try and extend plays and make the best play possible, which always leads to the turnover, whether it's an interception or fumble. So if he can improve on that, and you would hope that sitting behind Brees for a year, even though it wasn't Brees in his prime year, you'd hope that he'd learn something from that. And a Saints offense, they're always going to get the ball out early anyways. I think that's just how they are. So I'd expect him, if he were to be the starting quarterback for all next season, I'd expect him to have a lot less picks. You would hope a lot less fumbles because they do have a really good offensive line. If they were somehow, with their salary cap situation, if they were somehow still able to make the playoffs and not lose guys because of their salary cap, what would even happen when it comes to the playoffs with Winston? Could you even trust him? I don't think you even can, no matter how good of a season that he had. I think you just look back at the past 5 years of him starting for Tampa and say, I can't trust this guy in a playoff game. But, you know, that's the situation they're going to have to worry about when they get there because, again, their salary cap situation is complete salary cap hell. They did restructure Taysom Hill's contract. They made it a 4-year, $140 million extension, but it's really not that. It's just like a voidable contract that frees up salary cap for this season. So we're going to have to see what the Saints are going to do, but I would expect Winston to be their quarterback for next season. I don't expect it to be Taysom Hill, and the way it looks right now, it doesn't seem like they're going to bring someone else in. So
we're going to see more Taysom Hill at quarterback and on the field in general more than we've ever seen from the Saints offense. And he's been a pretty, focal part of the offense for, his whole time here at New Orleans. But yeah, he's gonna be on the field a lot. I'm not a Taysom Hill guy. I know you aren't either. I'm definitely not a Jameis Winston guy. It's just gonna come down to Peyton in my mind, and we'll see how genius Peyton is. I think this is not necessarily his Bill Belichick moment of last year, but it's pretty close to it. You've had Drew Brees basically your whole career, your whole head coaching career here at New Orleans. So let's see what you do without him. We're giving you kind of a washed up, not even washed up, but a guy who he was the number 1 pick, similar to Newton. He didn't have the same success in the NFL as Newton, but Winston has showed flashes of why he was the number 1 pick. Can Peyton dig those out of Winston and make the league think of Winston as a successful number 1 pick again? I mean, we'll see. I don't expect it, but I actually do think that this Saints team is going to be better than maybe a lot of people initially thought, maybe towards, really at the end of the regular season last year, because everyone was saying this is the Saints last year. And while I do agree with that, I actually saw a take on TikTok that was the Saints are going to go 0-16 next year. And at the time, I thought it was horrible, and it's even worse now because we're seeing, just like Bill Belichick has said many times before, and lots of people have said, former GMs, former coaches, Bill Polian, the cap is really crap. You can manipulate it in so many ways that even if you're in cap hell, you'll find a way to dig yourself out of that hole. And it looks like the Saints are going to do that. Are they going to be able to sign a bunch of people to big deals? Clearly, no. But they're going to be fine next year. And obviously no Drew Brees, but if you can somehow turn in some combination of Winston and Taysom Hill into something better than Brees, which is, I think, somewhat possible, at least in the playoffs. Definitely in the playoffs, if you compare it to what happened last year, at least. I think that's possible.
Yeah, I guess that's possible.
I guess it's
And
a low bar because he threw 3 picks or whatever, but
yeah, and in that division, I mean, the Saints are still a pretty good team. Are they going to be 11-5, 10? I guess they're playing 17 games next season, so I guess 11-6 or whatever. But no, I would expect them to be closer to 500, even with even no matter how good Winston plays, and no matter how good the rest of their team is. But it's still an easy division. They still have a chance to make the playoffs. You have to see what happens in the NFC West.
I'm not sold it's an easy division at all.
Well, I think it's an easier division than most, I would say. I think when you look at the Falcons, we'll have to see what happens with them. Are they even going to, if they take a quarterback in the first round, he's most likely going to sit behind Matt Ryan, but we'll have to see how Matt Ryan performs, if they ever go to the rookie during that season. But even still, their team isn't good enough really to win 9-10 games. The Panthers, they have Teddy Bridgewater at quarterback right now. I think they were actually somewhat decent last year, but I think with Bridgewater as your quarterback, you can't really go that far. So, and then obviously you have the Bucs being the best team in the division. So I think I think they're clearly the second best team in that division, but it all depends on what happens in the NFC West if they can even make the playoffs. But I think that if they were to get to the playoffs and make the playoffs, I think you would have a better shot with Winston than Brees this past season, just because he was completely dead. I mean, he had no arm. Even though they probably could have won the game, they maybe should have if Cook didn't fumble that ball. But I think people are expecting that breakdown to happen anyways when Brees. I mean, I think he threw 2 consecutive picks, then he threw a terrible pick for the last one. So I think you'd have a better shot with Winston because of his arm. And at least the higher ceiling, at least at the age that he's at and what he still has to prove. But will he even make the playoffs? I think that's a question.
As much as I like to hate on Breeze, at the same time, though, that Saints team was favored to beat the Bucs. I mean, they really had no excuses to lose that game. Breeze could have thrown 3 picks, and they still actually could have won that game, which is just amazing to me. So, yeah, I don't expect the Saints team to make the playoffs, but I definitely expect them, like you said. I expect them to be around 9-8, 8-9. That's going to be so weird to adjust to, by the way.
Yeah, I don't really like
that. I don't like it either. Just not having a 500 mark.
Yeah.
Not having 7-9, not having 9-7, 10-6. I think those numbers are great. I mean, maybe it's because I'm adjusted to them, but I like saying like 10-6, 12-4, 13-4.
Yeah, it seems weird.
16-1, 15-2. I don't like it. I mean, it'll be interesting. It'll be interesting because I mean, obviously now going undefeated is one more game, so we'll see. But
yeah, and I mean, speaking of, I mean, we brought up Winston and the Saints. I mean, something that happened a couple days ago was Cam Newton and the Patriots. They signed him back for a 1-year contract for $14 million. I mean, I know you're the Patriots fan, so I'd like to hear what you have to say about it. But for me, I would say he's probably not even going to be the starter unless whoever they bring in next, just Cam outbeats him in training camp. But I find that to be very surprising. So I'd say this is kind of like a backup plan to whoever they bring in. If that doesn't work out, then at least they have someone who was under the same system the year before and that knows that they can work somewhat of an offense around.
My hope and what I've heard is that this has basically nothing to do with their quarterback plans going forward, and this is more of just like a safety precaution / it's
Yeah.
14 mil, but it's similar to the contract last year in which it's very incentive heavy. They can basically just cut him before the season starts and not lose out on too much money, or they could just bring him as a backup, which at this point in Cam's career I don't think he would be completely against. I'm not exactly too sure what's going on in his head, but there's no way he's thinking that he could be a starter or that he would be a starter somewhere else. And he knows New England is his best chance to start. And if he's not starting in New England, he's probably not going to be starting anywhere else. But as far as do I think it's a good signing, I mean, sure. If Cam Newton is the starting quarterback, though, next year, I'm going to cry. I mean, he can't throw the ball. He threw 8 touchdowns last year, and I know he ran for 12, I want to say, but still, I mean, if you do that's 20 total touchdowns to 10 interceptions. That doesn't even count any of his fumbles, which literally one of his fumbles cost a game. They had the game. It was the first game. It was the Bills game. If he doesn't fumble that ball, it's at least going into overtime. And honestly, I think they probably win that game, and that gets you to 8-8. And who knows? I mean, if you had that game under your belt, you would have had so much more momentum. That really flattened the Patriots season, and that was a huge loss. I would still rather draft a quarterback. Whoever Bill likes. I'm not gonna debate names. I mean, it's a crapshoot. I'm not the one going to these guys' pro days. Whoever Bill likes. Let's just say it's Mac Jones. If he drafts Mac Jones, I would rather him start Jones. Maybe not even day one, but definitely year one. Definitely year one, no matter what. Similar to what the Dolphins did to Tua. Even if you're 3-3 and Fitzpatrick is playing all right, maybe not at that specific time, but at some point, I would love to see Mac Jones get the field. The sooner the better. I want to know what I have. I definitely want to know what I have after 1 year. I don't want to do this thing where Newton/Bridge quarterback X plays for 2 years. We bring Mac Jones in year 3 and we realize, wow, this guy is garbage. And we basically just wasted 3 years on nothing, especially because our bridge quarterback is more than likely going to be garbage. If you had Brady in here, right, I can understand you drafting a Jones and sitting him for 2 years because you've got Brady as your quarterback and he's plenty good. We don't have that. The Garoppolo situation. Belichick played that so well. The only problem was he underestimated how good Brady was going to be and for how long Brady was going to play. He thought Brady was going to be done around 39, 38, which is, I mean, not unreasonable. Brady goes to 43 though, and it's tough because, I mean, and Belichick, the one decision he did make wrong was he wanted to trade Brady instead of Garoppolo. Obviously, Kraft intervened and basically said, you're not doing that. Kraft, ultimately, that's one of the few times he's ever intervened, and it was a successful decision in the long run. But, yeah, I mean, ideally you would have had a similar Garoppolo situation coming, once Brady left to Tampa. You don't have that now, so I feel like you want to just find out whether or not your quarterback you draft is the guy or not. I don't want to sit him for 2 or 3 years.
Yeah, so we'll see what they bring in, whether they draft Mac Jones, if they bring someone else in, kind of like a Cam backup kind of situation for their quarterback situation. I'd expect them to draft a Mac Jones or whoever's there at 15, or if they want to move up for someone. But we'll have to see what happens with that. And I guess also speaking of the Patriots, they signed Jonnu Smith, a tight end from the Tennessee Titans. It's a 4-year contract for $50 million. 31 guaranteed though. So I mean, he kind of came into the starting role really last year, I guess somewhat of the season before, 2019, when their tight end Delaney Walker got injured and then he opted out of last season. And he's like a physical guy who has a lot of really good attributes about him. And in that offense, he really prospered in it because it's run base heavy and then play action where he can kind of go across the field in motion and then catch those slants. And he is very fast, honestly, and that really worked for him. So I think for the Patriots, they've always needed a tight end since Gronk basically got injured and then obviously retired and left. But really, those last couple years of Gronk weren't, not counting the playoffs, but the regular season, they really needed a true tight end again. Can Jonnu Smith be that kind of guy, like a top tight end in the league? Possibly. It depends on your quarterback, who it is. With Cam, he may work better because Cam can't throw the ball down the field, but I think it's a good signing. They have a lot of cap space, so they have a lot of money to throw around. They're getting a lot of guys back that opted out of last year, so I think it's a good signing. It's at least a weapon that you have offensively when you really have none, so I thought it was a pretty good signing.
It's a scary signing. It's really scary. Jonnu Smith is 25. He's played 4 years in the NFL, and the most reception yards he has in a year. And keep in mind, he's played 15 games, 16 games, 13 games, and 16 games. The most yards he has in a season is 448. I'm scared. I'm scared because this is the most money the Patriots have given to a skill player basically ever. The new deal is an APY of $12.5 million, which is the highest for a skill player in franchise history. More than Gronk, more than Randy Moss, more than an Edelman, more than any of these guys. More than any. And it's a 4-year deal, which means... And I'm not exactly sure. I'm sure we'll see how it works out. But let's say he's garbage after 2 years. I mean, you're gonna have to cut him, and you're gonna have to take a cap hit on that. It's scary. And now, it's similar to the Gilmore signing in that I'm almost in a Bill. I'm gonna just trust Bill mode here because I, I mean, who knows if Bill's not big on signing guys to big contracts, and this was basically like here's the money. Don't even listen to any other counteroffers because you're probably not going to get anything better than this. 4 years, 50 million, 31 guaranteed. You're not going to get anything better than that. Take it and just come over to New England. He has to play well. I mean, clearly. And when you look at a Hunter Henry, would you rather have had a Hunter Henry? Would you rather have had a guy out of the draft? I'm not too sure. I would assume you're going to draft somebody too, but I'm not. I'm not super confident in it.
Well, I kind of like it because he's like you said, he's only 25 years old, so he's pretty young, and he really only started starting last year. And you could say he only had 448 yards, but I think looking at that as a stepping stone into where he was coming into his own, he can, as long as he can get you more than 600 yards as a receiver, and he's a goal line threat also. I think that's pretty valuable. If he can get you 8 touchdowns and 600 plus yards in a season, I think you take that for the first 2 seasons. Obviously, you'd want that for the full contract. But if you're just saying for like the first 2 seasons, if he's going to give you that, I think you'd be pretty happy with that. And you could always draft another tight end. You could always get another tight end if you wanted to. He's also a pretty good run blocker, which is something that they always like. I mean, Gronk's probably the best run blocking tight end of all time. They do have Damian Harris as their running back. I'd assume he's going to be the starter for next season. So not only is he he's getting better in the receiving area, but he's already a good run blocker. So for those reasons, I think it works out for them. And maybe they overpaid for him, but I think compared to him and Hunter Henry, you could go either way, but I think they probably just saw the upside in Jonnu Smith and said, why not try and get him over Hunter Henry?
I'm the other way around. I mean, I see the upside in Hunter Henry more just there was a more of a receiver than Jonnu Smith. We'll see what happens overall. If it's the guy that Bill likes, it's his call, and it's tough for me to doubt Bill in a situation like this, especially when you're throwing around big contracts like this where Bill just doesn't do that. I'd have to expect he loves Smith, but we'll see. I don't love the contract. I don't think it's the worst. You needed a tight end regardless, so it's definitely not the worst thing ever. So
yeah, so we'll have to see how that goes. And probably the biggest contract of the free agency so far has been Aaron Jones of the Packers. He's re-signing with the Packers. It's a 4-year deal for $48 million. And this was definitely lower than I think most people thought. And it did come out that there were bigger offers on the table from other teams, but he wanted to stay in Green Bay, so he took a little bit of a pay cut. So the contract, it's basically $9.5 million per year, which I know you were saying that he's probably going to get less than 10, which he did, but I think if he were to go to another team, he would have got more than that. I just think that he wanted to stay in Green Bay, and their cap situation is a little tricky also. So, look, is it a good contract? I guess it's a good contract, but it's really not because you're still paying a lot of money to a running back when you just drafted one in A.J. Dillon last year, who showed a lot of promise last year when he was playing. So I think you could have just went with Dillon and maybe Jamal Williams, who they also have, or brought in a different running back, who's a lot cheaper, obviously, than Aaron Jones. I think you would have been fine that way, too. But clearly, they still like Aaron Jones. He was very productive last year. Can he keep that up for this whole contract? I guess we'll have to see. But I probably would not have signed him. At least they got him for a little bit less than other teams were paying for, but even still, I probably still wouldn't have got Aaron Jones.
If you've watched episodes, you know my opinion on running back contracts. Just not a fan. Even if it's at a hometown discount, I just 9.5. I'd rather spend that 9.5. Even on, I mean, not that I'm not exactly sure where you spend that 9.5 on the Packers, but we just talked about Jonnu Smith. He's getting more than 9.5, but I would rather have Jonnu Smith than Aaron Jones, and I know that Aaron Jones is, he's a top 10 running back, and that Jonnu Smith, I just flamed Jonnu Smith for not having over 448 yards in a season, but you spent that second round pick on A.J. Dillon. Running backs are a dime a dozen. They're the most replaceable, position in the league, basically. They have the highest floor out of any position when you look at, free agents and all that. I just don't see the point, and I know LaFleur does love to have a big stable of running backs, but when you want to have a stable of running backs, I'd like to have them all for relatively cheap, young, contracts that I just basically can't regret. I mean, it's what the Patriots have done for a while, and for the most part, it's worked out. Running backs, like, you can even go back to Danny Woodhead, Ben Jarvis, Green Ellis, Shane Vereen, Stephen Ridley, James White, Sony Michel,
Just
first
naming
round
every
pick.
Patriots running back.
Well, but all these guys were Rex Burkhead. I mean, these guys were all young, cheap contracts, whether they're lowish draft picks or they're random free like Burkhead. I mean, he was a random free agent signing from the Bengals. I'd rather bring in guys like that than pay Aaron Jones 4 years, 48. Because I would be shocked if they actually ended up not regretting this contract after 4 years. I just would.
Yeah, and they probably will. I mean, we've just seen it with running backs. And again, this isn't the most money in the world, but it's enough to the point where your team, you definitely need to improve in other areas, as seen by the last two playoff appearances, especially defense. And it seems like with this contract, you're probably limiting yourself unless they can restructure contracts. And they also have their all-pro center, Corey Linsley's a free agent, so we'll have to see if they even can sign him back. Which, again, that hurts your running back, because without a good offensive line, there's really no point in having a top 10 running back, because there's just going to be no holes. There's going to be no lanes for him. There's going to be less time on your quarterback for dump-offs and obviously just the rest of your offense. So, it's great to have a really good running back, and he could be really productive, but if you're not going to have a really good offensive line, then it doesn't really matter, as we've seen with a lot of teams where they do have a really good running back, like the Giants or the Cowboys recently, where their offensive lines just haven't been that good, and the running backs, even though they may still put up the numbers at the end of the season, when you're looking at the games, individual games, they're just not having as big of an impact as you would think that they would for the type of player that they are. So we'll have to see what happens with the Packers. The NFC, the good thing is that they are in the NFC and not the AFC. At least for like the top teams in the league, where in the AFC you could have the Colts possibly with Wentz, obviously the Chiefs, the Bills. While in the NFC it's kind of the Bucks, the Packers, and then whoever really comes out of the NFC West, honestly. So I kind of, at least they're in the NFC where they have a little bit of more flexibility, but they're going to have to improve defensively, and I don't really know exactly what options they have in order to do that, because as we saw, the Bucks pass rush, and if Brady could play at the level he was playing at last year, even just a little bit less, the Bucks are clearly the better team. So I'm not exactly sure what they're going to do in the rest of this free agency, honestly.
Other free agents that haven't been signed?
Yeah, I mean, are we talking about the Packers or just in general?
Well, I was talking about in general, but I mean...
Yeah. I mean, other free agents that signed...
that haven't signed? Well, okay, we can talk about,
Oh, that haven't signed? There's a couple free agents that still, bigger free agents that haven't signed yet.
Trent Williams, Bud Dupree. There's Galladay hasn't signed yet. Clowney, if you want to count him. Tooney hasn't signed. I mean, as far as the Packers are concerned, I would have just rather seen that 9.5 go literally anywhere else. Honestly, I'd rather I don't know. Would I rather the 9.5 go to a kicker? Probably not, but any other than kicker and punter, I think I would have rather seen that 9.5 go.
Yeah, and again, they have the option of Dylan behind him, which he probably would have been pretty good if he was a solo act, honestly, but you'd always have a 2 running back system anyways, and you needed improvements in other areas. So I think after what happened last season, when they didn't get Rodgers any offensive help, they tried to kind of fix that mistake last season, even though they had the top offense last year, but I think they just overpaid for a running back, honestly. If it was any other position on the offensive side, I don't think it's an overpay, no matter what the really money is. But I think for a running back, especially when you have a backup option, I just don't think that was the right move for them at this time.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not saying that A.J. Dillon by himself being a full-on just workhorse like a Derrick Henry would be a good idea or anything, but I mean, A.J. Dillon, Jamal Williams, you bring in another guy on a 2-year, $7 million contract, maybe even cheaper. You've got 3 great, solid running backs that will last you at least a couple of years. I mean, I would have preferred that, but anyways, I mean.
And, I mean, I would say the next biggest free agent signing, which just happened less than an hour ago, was Shaq Barrett, and he re-signed with the Buccaneers. It was a 4-year deal worth $72 million with $36 million guaranteed. I mean, I don't think anyone thought that they weren't gonna re-sign him. Obviously, they tagged Chris Godwin, and they were looking to get a long-term deal done with Shaq Barrett. 2 years ago, obviously, he had 19.5 sacks. Last year, he wasn't as good in the regular season, but he turned it up in the playoffs. He was him, JPP, Sue, Levante David, Devin White. They were all amazing in the playoffs. So I think this is a good contract. I think they were getting him back no matter what. So, and the numbers on it are, it's a base value of $17 million. So I don't think that's a bad contract at all. And again, he can improve. Is he going to get 19.5 sacks again? Maybe not, but I think he's always going to be like a 12-plus sack guy.
I'd be a lot more conflicted if this was my team rather than just the Bucks, because I mean, as a Bucks fan, I'm more of just a Brady fan. So I like to see the talent returning, but the contracts line up a little bit weird with the window of Brady. I mean, if you sign Levante to a 4-year, Barrett to a 4-year, how is this going to work out? I mean, am I like after Brady retires, which I'd assume you retire after the year after this year, after next year?
They did extend him another year.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. So you
yeah.
got 2 more years, right? Am I gonna love those contracts after Brady retires? Probably not. And now, is it worth it? Yes, but do I think it's a great, awesome contract for the Buccaneers? I don't. If it's this or nothing, you probably. I mean, I'd have to see what other deals there are to be made. But if it's this or nothing, I would assume I like the call, but I don't love the contract.
It was something that they had to do. They went into the offseason with Godwin and Barrett as their 2 big questions, and they're both under contract. At least, I mean, obviously Godwin is, but it's under the franchise tag. But those are the 2 biggest questions, and they got it both done. And I think that you'd have to be happy as a Bucs fan knowing that the same team is going to return. You're still going to have Brady, Evans, Godwin, Barrett, JPP, David, all those guys. And I think you'd have to be happy that your Super Bowl winning team is coming back. And maybe in the long run, these contracts won't work out because obviously Brady is going to retire at some point. But if you can get to another Super Bowl, win another Super Bowl, have sustained success for these next 2 years, I think it's worth it. And I think you have to know that after 3 or 4 years when Brady retires, that unless you draft a really good quarterback or something, you're just going to have to assume that you're going to have a rebuild. But I think most fans would be okay with that, considering that the Bucs were the worst sports organization in all sports, and they finally got a Super Bowl, and you're at least for the next 2 years going to be making the playoffs and having a chance at the Super Bowl. So I think fans would be happy with that. So I think maybe in the long run it's not great, but the short term I think it's a good contract.
Yeah, no, I agree. That's why I like the contract. I don't love it, but yeah, and if it's a deal you had to make, it's a deal you had to make.
Yeah, and I think. I think if you were to ask Bucs fans, like, are you happy about the contract? They may say, like, the money-wise and stuff like that, maybe not. But, again, it's something you had to do. So, other than Barrett, I mean, you had Kevin Zeitler. He signed with the Ravens. Not that big of a free agent signing, but they needed offensive line help. And I think it was a 3-year contract for $22.5 million. He was pretty good a couple years ago, and then he was kind of average the last couple years, but he's still a pretty good offensive lineman. If you have anything to say about that, there's not much to say, but
yeah, I mean, 3 years, 22 mil. We'll see. I mean, it's fine. I mean, I guess you didn't want to pay a guy like Tooney a lot of money, so this is kind of
it's probably the downgraded version, but still good enough.
Yeah. I mean, as far as guys that haven't signed yet, I mean, there's still a lot of guys to look at. I mean, Trent Williams hasn't signed. Bud Dupree hasn't signed. Trey Hendrickson hasn't signed. Kenny Golladay. So there was a report that the Bucs don't think that more than 1 or 2 wide receivers will get more than 10 or 12 mil. Maybe that's true. We'll see what it means for Chris Godwin as far as playing on the tag. I feel like, Godwin's probably going to play on the tag this year, right? You would assume?
Yeah, I'd assume so.
I think he will. I don't think they're going to get a long-term deal done. They may even just... I'm not sure how long Godwin's going to be on the Bucs, but it might be this year, and then after that, he's leaving. As far as Kenny Golladay is concerned, we'll see where he goes. even I mean the Pats still have a bunch of cap room. I would like to see the Pats bring in a Galladay. Um, I just want they need a receiver if they want to compete. I wouldn't mind bringing in a Galladay. I don't want to tie him up on a 4 or 5 year something crazy type of deal. But if I could get him on, something a little bit cheaper, short term, even if I have to overpay more per year, but I would rather take the years off. I'd rather do a 2 year for. I mean, I'd rather do a 2 year for 30 than a 4 year for 44. To be honest.
Yeah, and we'll have to see what happens with that, with Godwin, and based on what Galladay does. But I just read something that said the Patriots are making a strong push for Matthew Judon. He's a Ravens defensive end linebacker. He's basically a 3-4 linebacker. So that would be, I mean, that'd be, if they were to sign him, he's a very good player. It seems like almost every Ravens linebacker is always really good. But I'll be interesting to see if they even do sign him, what his contract would look like. But that's a major addition on their defense.
It's a big addition. I mean, they need pass rush. I mean, throughout a lot of time, except for maybe a couple years we had Chandler Jones, a few years we had some other standout years, but their pass rush has never been that great. Judon would be nice. We'd have to see the money though. I mean, he's one of those where my mic just lagged out for some
Yeah.
reason. He's one of those guys where it's all about the money. I mean, we'll have to see the contract. I if it's cheap, cool. If it's short, better, awesome. I don't want to sign, but again, I'm not doing a 4 year something crazy money. So we'll see.
Yeah, we'll have to see. And um, there's also reports that the Jets and Kenny Galladay have increased in talks. So I expect big money. I saw a report that said he'd get less than $20 million, but probably 16 to 18 million dollars a year, like a tier below the top guys who got 20 million, like Thomas, Julio. Even though Amari got 20 million, I guess he's technically in that conversation. And I think I saw something about possibly. I mean, I don't know if Richard Sherman's still a big name now, but the Broncos possibly signing Richard Sherman. So for whatever it's that worth, but I guess we'll see about the Kenny Galladay situation, like we were just talking about.
I mean, as far as Kenny Galladay is concerned, like I just said, if the Jets are going to offer him 4 years and 64 million, that might be tough to beat. But if I'm the Patriots, I have no problem saying, all right, here's 2 years, 40 mil. We're giving you more per year than the Jets will, 4 more per year, but instead of 4 years, it's two. I think if you're Galladay, you probably still take the 464, but it at least makes it a tough
And
conversation.
you're good with if the Patriots were to offer 2 for 40, you'd be good with that.
Yeah, I'd be good with that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess for 2 years it's not terrible, and it allows him to hit the open market again when the cap is a normal, value. So for him and for the team, I think those are good contracts. I mean, for those 2 years in New England, what exactly is their team going to look like? But I think even though I think the cap situation is going to be better, obviously in 2 years than it is now, I think he'd almost rather take the long-term security and probably the bigger money, even though you might be able to make more money in 2 years. But I think he would probably rather just have his money now. But that would be a very interesting offer, though. Shorter term, it's kind of almost like a baseball contract. Like, would you rather just go for like the longer term contract and more money, or the shorter term with a higher AAV? So I don't know. That depends on the player. Would they rather have more money in the long term or more in the short term?
Yeah, I just don't love the idea of being tied to Galladay for 4 years.
He
I would
he does
regret
get
it, but
injured very often. So
yeah, I'm not sure if I'm in love with paying Galladay for 4 years, and I'd rather just do take some more money, 2 year contract, gives you the opportunity to hit the market, gives us the opportunity to not be tied up to a receiver for 4 years. I would like that, but I mean, we'll see what other. I mean, something tells me the Patriots are not going to sign Galladay. They're not going to sign Juju. They're not going to sign any of these big guys. It's going to be some Adam Humphries type of guy or some low on the radar type of guy who maybe they can get for around that 9 million mark. I'm not exactly. I mean, what's a Curtis Samuel going to command on the market? I'm not exactly too sure what that would get. You'd be expecting around 14 to 15 million still for Curtis Samuel, I would assume, around what Juju's going to get. But if you can get somebody like Curtis Samuel for cheap, that would be interesting.
Yeah, I'd be interesting to see what Curtis Samuel would get. I haven't looked at any like mock contracts or anything like that. I'd expect him to get. Obviously, he's not going to get top money, but he's a pretty productive player who, in the right system, can be very productive. So I'd expect him to get probably somewhere around that, like a $14 million a year contract. And I expect Juju to honestly get that. Is Juju a number one? No. I mean, maybe on a bad team, but he's a solid number two who could, you could line him up in the slot.
He's a great number two. I mean,
Yeah.
we saw.
And he's a good slot receiver too, which helps.
Yeah, I mean, I would consider Juju a not great number one, a pretty bad number one, but a great number two. I mean, one of the best number twos in the league. I mean, even just a few years ago, they were AB and Juju were probably maybe the best duo receiver combo.
Number wise, definitely.
Yeah. But as far as other wide receivers, I mean, Corey Davis, I know. I mean, as a player, I don't love Corey Davis, but he's very interesting contract-wise just because we'll see what he gets. I mean, the Titans didn't even exercise his fifth-year option, so you might just kind of pause and say, you might even just, if let's just say the Patriots do Belichick calls up Vrabel and says, what's going on with Corey Davis? I mean, why did you guys not exercise that fifth-year option? What do you guys think of him? But, yeah, I mean, he had a 984-yard receiving yard year. If you could bring Corey Davis in for something cheap, I would assume he'd maybe get around 10 mil. I don't think he's going to get something that Curtis Samuel or Juju will get. I would be really surprised if he got around that 14 mil mark. I would bring Corey Davis in 2 years, 20 mil. Maybe even what if I could sell Corey Davis, come to New England, get a bunch of yards. We don't have a bunch of receivers. You may be even able to be the number one if you play outstanding. 1 year, 11 mil. You're on basically a prove it year. We can see if we get something out of you. Because I just wouldn't be interested in signing Corey Davis to a multi-year deal just because he might not be good. He might just not even be good in general.
Yeah, I mean, you have to see with him. Again, I like his upside. I just think that he's kind of been phased out in Tennessee, clearly. But even when he was still there, he just wasn't getting the ball a lot. And I think that system just didn't really work for him. So I think in a different system, I think he'd be very productive. And whatever system that would be, whether it's New England, he's going to get like a short-term contract, not a lot of money. So whatever team does get him, I think he just has a lot of value if you know how to use him and know how to use him correctly. But there's also, I mean, I've seen other rumors also that, and we were talking about this with the Ravens, that Orlando Brown wants to be paid as a left tackle, not a right tackle, so he'd rather get traded than stay with the Ravens. And there's been a couple of rumors that the Jaguars would trade DJ Chark and a pick for Orlando Brown.
Did they specify on the pick or no?
I don't know exactly what the pick was.
Probably the first overall, right?
Yeah, first overall pick for Orlando Brown. I forget what it was. Maybe it was like a third-round pick or something. But, I mean, to get a solid left tackle, obviously he played left tackle for the Jaguars. Get Trevor Lawrence, so you would have that building block of your blindside guy. Obviously, you're losing someone in DJ Chark as a receiver who's been somewhat productive over the last 2 years. Is he great? No. And does he have the ability to be great? Probably not. So I wouldn't mind that trade, honestly. I think that's a pretty good trade for Jacksonville. Obviously, you're not going anywhere in this first year. So to get someone like an Orlando Brown, who has shown that he's a pretty good, one of the top offensive tackles in the league, to get him for DJ Chark and a pick, I like that deal. If those rumors are even true, but I'd assume they are because it does seem pretty realistic.
It depends. I mean, to me, I don't know. It's tough because you just franchise tagged Cam Robinson. If you bring in Brown in, you probably move Robinson to right. You bring Brown in, you give him his deal that he wants, and you extend him and you make him the left tackle for Trevor Lawrence's future. I wouldn't hate it. The only problem is you can give a quarterback an offensive line. But if you have no weapons, I mean, that's not a great look. Chark's maybe not the best player ever, but if you don't have anything for Lawrence to throw to, that's going to be scary. I wouldn't be super against it, but keep in mind that if you're going to trade a third-round pick in DJ Chark, you're not even getting, and the guy you're getting back isn't even going to be on a good deal. It's risky.
Yeah, no, it's definitely risky, and you'd have to hope that whether in the draft or maybe the weapons that you have already could somewhat step up. Obviously, they have James Robinson, a running back, who was really productive last year. But again, you're not going to go anywhere if you're Jacksonville, so I think almost having the offensive line be better than the receivers is honestly a better thing, especially when you're not going to do anything, playoffs wise or record wise. And because you could always get free agent signings, you could always draft wide receivers, and they usually seem to work out more than offensive linemen. It seems like maybe not at the top of the draft, but it seems like later in drafts you can always get a wide receiver in the third or fourth round that seems to be pretty productive for your team, even if he's not a top 10 guy in the league. There's always productive guys.
I would say the other way around. I would say it's tough to get a stellar wide receiver, and I'm not saying DJ Chark is stellar, but it's tough to get a wide receiver in the third round, whereas if I just need a right tackle, I can get a right tackle in the second, third, fourth.
But someone who's going to be solid at your offensive tackle position, even if it's right tackle. I think earlier in the draft, obviously you have the top offensive tackle prospects that are usually hits. Obviously some of them miss. It always happens, but I think when you get into the third, fourth round of drafts, I think it's easier to find a wide receiver. I mean, if you look at most wide receivers in the league that are not even the top, like the elite guys, a lot of them are like third, fourth round picks. And I don't know, I just feel that it's easier to find a wide receiver later in a draft or even in a free agency or anything like that.
I mean, Orlando Brown was the 83rd pick in the draft in 2018.
And I will say he was a first round talent, but his combine was so bad that he fell off. So he should have been first round. His combine, he was the guy at the combine. He should have been, because he wasn't. But. Yeah, but if you look at his combine, well, I'm saying he was going first round, and then the combine happened. Because his combine, he was the guy who ran like a 5.8 for the 40, and he was completely out of shape. He did like 3 reps of the bench press or something like that, something ridiculously low especially for an offensive tackle. So if you take away his combine, he was going in the first round. And he's shown that he was a first-round talent because he's one of the best offensive tackles in the league.
And Cam Robinson was the 34th pick. I don't think you need to if you're giving me the 20th pick, we'll just say the 20th pick, I would rather draft a receiver then. And if you're giving me the 75th pick, I'd rather draft an offensive lineman then. So if you gave me both of those picks and you said receiver 1, lineman the other, we'll just call right tackle. Give me the receiver at 20 and give me the tackle at 75, and not the other way around.
I'd probably go other way around, only because if you're looking for both guys just to be solid starters, not be elite, not be top of their position, just be solid starters who are going to put up numbers, obviously in different ways, I'd rather go offensive lineman first round and receiver third round. I think I'd rather do that. But I just think there's more wide receiver talent that you could find later in the draft than there is offensive line talent.
Maybe you're right. I think to me it's more just because as a Patriots fan, Michael Onwenu, he wasn't a tackle, but we've seen so many Patriots offensive linemen just get dragged up out of nowhere compared to
that's also great coaching, though. I mean, they've had the best offensive line coach for the last 20 years.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Yeah, it's like that might be why I think that way. Even though, and because the Patriots have had so much struggles at receiver drafting, but yeah, I would like to spend the 20th pick on a wide receiver because. I mean, odds are the 75th pick, that's not going to get you, a Justin Jefferson. That's not going to get you a DK Metcalf, although maybe you could at 50. I don't know.
What's funny is that I'm looking at Twitter to see, like, all the rumors, but there's so many fake accounts making fake contracts. Like, I feel like I've seen, like, at least, like, 20 that have shown. I just saw one that said Juju's going to the Colts. I saw one about... I think it was Ryan Fitzpatrick was signing a deal with someone. So Kenny Golladay to the Patriots. That was another. I mean, maybe that one's also real, but it was at least fake for that time. So.
I mean, yeah, I feel like every single podcast that I've seen or radio that I've listened to in the past 2 years of free agency, every single time they report a fake contract.
Yeah, someone always gets baited into doing a fake contract.
The Texans signed Andre Roberts on a 2-year deal up to $6 million. I mean, I don't really care, but
it's special teams, honestly. I mean, again, the Texans they're pretty bad, so but I mean, I'd say unless something happens like in the next hour or so, I mean, at least for us just doing this right now, I'd say that's all that's really happened. Those are the big names that we kind of went through. Those are the people who've been signed, and I expect even just later tonight, probably a couple more big names would sign. But I'd say that's probably it for this episode.
Yeah, we'll see what happens. I mean, there's a bunch of free agents. I would assume like somebody like Trent Williams is going to stay with the 49ers.
Yeah, I think so too.
But if he doesn't, it'd be interesting to see where he goes. Maybe, who knows? Maybe the Jaguars say, hey, instead of trading for Orlando Brown, let's just sign Trent Williams to a mega deal. I wouldn't. I don't know if I would like it if I'm the Jaguars, because Trent Williams doesn't feel like he fits your age group, what you're shooting for. But
Yeah.
I wouldn't hate it. To get protection around Trevor Lawrence is some of the most important stuff. So
I guess one last thing. The Patriots have made an offer to Curtis Samuel. So I don't know. It doesn't say what the offer is or anything about it, but they have at least made an offer to Curtis Samuel.
I'd be interested in Curtis Samuel. I just haven't watched enough of him to have like a super hard take on him, but I would be super interested, because I'd be more interested in a Curtis Samuel than I would in a Juju Smith-Schuster. And I'm not saying Juju's bad, but I think Curtis Samuel might have a higher ceiling than Smith-Schuster, because I kind of know I guess you kind of know what Curtis Samuel is too, but I think I know what Juju Smith-Schuster is more than I do Curtis Samuel. Because I know if I bring a Juju in, I'm going to get a solid number, a great number 2, but he's not going to be that number 1, and he's not going to, and you can tell when he has to be that number 1, he just isn't that. Any double team he's going to see, he's just not really going to do well against it.
Yeah.
He's just not a number 1 type of guy, which is fine, but it's tough to pay a guy who has to be a number 2 to be in his best place $14 million a year. That's just tough.
Yeah, so we'll see what happens with that situation with the Patriots, with other teams looking for wide receivers. But unless anything else happens, we're going to wrap it up.
Yeah, that's it for this episode. Appreciate everybody who stayed to the end. Check the descriptions, bunch of stuff going on down there. The regular Spotify, Apple podcasts, the Clips channel. I think TikTok should be starting soon as well, so pay attention to the description for that. Bunch of stuff, really. There should be a bunch of stuff down there. Obviously, timestamps for everything in the description as well. But that's it. We'll be back. Actually, last thing, this episode, so you'll see it Tuesday at noon. It's also on the radio Tuesday at noon. If you really want to listen to it on the radio, go for it. WQAQ 98.1. If you just Google that, and it should be the first thing to come up. Other than that, we'll be back Friday at noon. Also, before we head out, Matthew Judon did sign with the Patriots. I'm just going to put the details to the contract somewhere on the screen here. He's been a Pro Bowler the last 2 years. He's got 30.5 sacks over the last 4 years. I like the contract. I think, obviously you want to spend the money. To me, it's, would you rather have had Judon for this or Barrett for 4 years, 72, or would you rather have had maybe even an offensive weapon like a Galladay, or maybe even, I'm not sure exactly what like a Von Miller situation is right now. We'll see what happens with that. We'll see what happens with somebody else maybe. I like it. I don't know if it was the best option available, but it's just too early for me to even like have a super hard take on it right now. That's kind of how I feel about it.
Yeah, we don't even know what the money is yet. I saw something that said it's at least more than $13 million a year. So, does it put him out of the question of signing, an offensive weapon like Galladay or even Samuel? I think if they were to sign Judon for more than 13, I'd say they probably would go after Samuel more than Galladay. But
I don't think they're getting Galladay. It doesn't seem like they're going to get Galladay regardless.
So, yeah, again, we don't know what the exact contract is, but you're getting a really good player for probably a little less than maybe someone over the last 2 seasons has put together like him. You're getting for maybe a little less than that, but which is good for you. So, yeah, I think, again, we don't know exactly what the contract is, but I would say it's probably going to be a pretty good contract. It's at least a good signing, I would say.
I'm definitely content with it. I would say I'm happy about it. It just is going to come down to like, once this unfolds, once free agency's wrapping up, I'm going to look at Judon. I'm going to say, what were my other options? If Von Miller gets cut or something and Von Miller gets signed by somebody else for relatively cheap, it wouldn't be too much. Would you have rather had a Von Miller on maybe a 1 or 2 year deal, or would you rather have had, Judon for, we'll just say 14, 15 mil? Or would you rather have tried to make a push for somebody like Barrett? You could have maybe had Barrett for 20 mil. Would you rather have Barrett for 20 mil or Judon for 14? I probably err on the side of Judon for 14. But I'm just throwing out the other options. I like it. I like it. I'm not mad. In other news, though, I mean, Brandon Graham signed an extension. He signed a 1 year extension, so it's about 20 mil for 2 years. Verrett re-signed with the Niners. He's on a 1 year, 5.5, 6 mil contract. But other than that, that's nothing really.
Yeah, we were hoping that something big would happen while we're still in the studio. But if something like big does happen later tonight or something, we'll make a video about it, and we'll add it to this. But yeah, I mean, I guess for the Verrett signing, he did have bigger offers on the table, multi-year contract offers, but he stayed with the Niners for 1 more year. I guess he's looking to, when the cap goes back up again next season, to get a bigger contract if he plays like he did this past season. So I guess that was really the only wrinkle to that. But yeah, nothing big really happened.
To me, I mean, keeping it short, but Verrett's play has never been a question for me. It's more just
His injury.
His injury history, yeah.
So again, yeah, as long as he's healthy next season and he still has a pretty good year, he'll probably get a pretty big contract next offseason.
Yeah, but yeah, so this might be the end of the episode. It might not. Anyways, we already kind of did the outro.
Yeah.
So if we're back, we're back. If we're not, we're not. Friday at noon. Description, read it. Bye.